Shalom. Welcome to Light to the Nations. Here we are still in the 5th chapter, Parakeh of Hilchot Beit HaBechira, the Rambam's Laws of the Chosen House. Halacha Yud Zayin is where we left off, in the middle of the 17th halacha, the last halacha in chapter 5. And perhaps we're going to be finishing today. We've been talking about the 8 chambers that open up onto the Court of Israel. The Court of Israel, of course, the eastern section of the Azarah, 11 amot wide, and these chambers we began to discuss. The chamber of the salt. First we begin, in the Rambam's language, we begin on the southern end of the Court of Israel with the chamber of the salt, the chamber of the parva, and the chamber of the washing. And we discussed that in the chamber of the salt for the offerings is stored. The chamber of the parva is where the hides of the offerings are tanned, and then the Rambam mentions that on the roof of that particular chamber is the mikveh that was used by the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, on Yom Kippur for the 4 immersions, excluding the first of the 5, the first immersion which takes place on the roof of the water gate. And he goes on and tells us that the chamber of the washing chamber is where the innards of the sacred offerings were washed, and from there a winding staircase led up to the roof of the Beit HaParva, where that mikveh was located. And then he goes on and tells us again, V'hashalosh Shevet Tzafon, the 3 chambers in the northern part of the Court of Israel, Lishkat HaGazit, chamber of hewn stone, Lishkat HaGolah, the chamber of the wheel, sometimes translated as the chamber of the bowl. This is an element of water as well. And Lishkat Ha'etz. This is about where we left off, so I want to just review, recap, and go on with some more details about these chambers. Lishkat HaGazitz, the chamber of the hewn stone, Shaba Sanhedre Gdola Yoshevet. This is the location, the office, the designated station of the great Sanhedrin, which of course was the body of wisdom and legislature, and all judicial decisions for the Jewish people took place there in the Holy Temple. V'chetzia haya kodesh v'chetzia haya chol. And this chamber was constructed in such a way that half of it was in the sacred kodesh area, the area which is the sanctified area, and half of it in the non-sanctified area. V'la shnei ptachim, and thus this particular chamber, the chamber of hewn stone of the Sanhedrin, had 2 entrances, one leading out into the holy area, echad lakodesh ve'echad lachol, and one entrance leading into the non-sanctified area. Uvechetzi shel chol hayu haSanhedrin yoshvin, and in the non-sanctified area, this is where the Sanhedrin was located. And we mentioned, first of all, Lishkat HaGazit, the chamber of hewn stone, called so either because the seats that were arranged in a very unusual manner, it's called kind of like half of a circle, how the judges of the Sanhedrin were all seated in such a way that each one had full eye contact with each of his fellows, and also this arrangement enabled witnesses who came to give testimony before the court to be seen equally by everyone. So either the seats in this particular chamber were made of this exquisite type of cut stone, or alternatively, another opinion is that the walls itself, the very chamber itself, was constructed of this very remarkable type of cut stone. Either way, this was a chamber that was executed with tremendous beauty aesthetically in order to give honor to the sages of Israel. And I also mentioned that the concept of why was it that the Sanhedrin's sessions were held indeed within the proximity of the Holy Temple. And one reason that we gave historically is the fact that you have to realize a great deal of the daily nitty-gritty kind of involvement of the Sanhedrin in the life of the nation in the time of the Temple involved the priesthood. The functioning of the priesthood was extremely important in the time of the Holy Temple, and it affected large amounts of people. Remember that there are many Kohanim that are serving in the Holy Temple. And all of the lineal male descendants of Aaron are privileged and obligated to serve in the temple, lest they have some sort of a blemish or defect, or there is some sort of reason where we are told biblically that they are exempted or prevented from serving. It was up to the Sanhedrin in some cases to determine if there would be such a blemish, and thus they were hands-on because these questions came up often with new Kohanim that perhaps came to serve in the temple. And another reason why, and we described the process of how the Kohanim would appear before the Sanhedrin, and it was a very joyous occasion indeed when no blemish was found in the seat of Aaron. But another reason why the Sanhedrin sat in the Holy Temple is because their decisions, which of course, all of their decisions, not only those pertaining to the priesthood, but those that pertain to every Jew and to the whole world, and all of their decisions that were based on their great Torah knowledge, it's so fateful, it's so supercharged with responsibility. It's awesome. The fate of the nation was in their hands, and of course the entire concept of those sages that member the Sanhedrin, it's an exercise in tremendous humility, because each one was ready to vacate his seat for one who was greater in knowledge and wisdom than himself. And their whole connection to the people through their knowledge of the Torah was one of total nullification and concern for the fate of the nation. In short, what I want to say is they were very much influenced by being in the holy place, by being in the proximity of the divine presence. This rendered their decisions, this enabled their decisions to be made under the influence, as it were, of the very holiness of the place. This is part of the reason why, on one level, we find historically a very interesting concept, and we discussed this much, much earlier in our studies in Beit HaBechira. In the beginning of our studies, in the earlier chapters, we talked about the concept of the Holy Ark, the Aron HaBrit, Ark of the Covenant, that was, of course, located in the first temple in the Holy of Holies, but that was not regathered into the second temple. It was hidden towards the close of the first temple period by King Josiah. This derived by our sages from a cryptic verse in the book of Chronicles. King Josiah, the king in Israel at the time of the first destruction, a number of years before the temple was destroyed, when he saw certain indications of what was about to come, commanded the Levites at that time to hide certain items, that they should not be available to the enemy, they should not fall into enemy hands. Ostensibly, that's a simple reason. And one of those items, the Ark of the Covenant, was, and we discussed this again earlier on in the Rambam when he discusses the history of Har HaBayit. He tells us that King Solomon saw with divine prophecy that eventually the temple would be destroyed, and he oversaw the construction of this chamber underneath the Temple Mount, into which King Josiah, later in history, commanded that the Ark be hidden. He did this years before, over 30 years perhaps, before the first temple was destroyed. And I think that one reason why he did this so many years before the temple was destroyed, even though after that the temple continued to function until the end, although at one point later the offerings were suspended as well, I think the real reason that he did that has much to do with what we're learning right now. It has to do with the fact that the Sanhedrin was very much influenced by the presence of the Ark of the Covenant. Where they're sitting in the Holy Temple, in their area within the Chamber of Hewn Stone, they were kind of diagonally opposite the Holy of Holies. And they were kind of like, they had a certain sort of inspiration from being in the proximity of the Holy of Holies and the Ark of the Covenant. And you know that the holy sources explain to us the unique relationship between Torah itself and the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant really represents Torah here on earth. It contains the tablets. And the Ark of the Covenant is like, besides being the place where Moshe went to receive the the communication with Hashem, it's really representative of the Ratzon Hashem, of the will of God on earth, going forth to the people. And I think that the Sanhedrin sitting opposite the Ark of the Covenant, that juxtaposition had a great deal of influence on their process of being able to determine and qualify and bring to the forefront, bring out to light Hashem's decisions for His people. And King Josiah, in an act of tremendous compassion and prophetic understanding, intuitively realized that it's not always going to be like this. We're not always going to be able to have the luxury of being able to be on this level of intimacy and to have that work for us. And why do I call it compassion and wisdom? Because he realized that he had to begin to train the people of Israel and the sages of Israel to be able to function in the brave new world of the post-destruction, where they might not have that access anymore. And he realized that things are going to change, and therefore, in order to gradually ease the people of Israel into a situation where they're going to be able to develop their own intellectual vessels, their own capacity for being able to, function on a level and be responsible and be able to receive Hashem's word and be able to work out what His will is for His people in this world, also without the influence of the Ark of the Covenant. They're going to have to get used to that, so he kind of arranged that early to give them a grace period of starting to be able to still be there, still be in the Chamber of Hewn Stone, but already without that kind of extra power that they were receiving from the Ark. This is one particular line of reasoning regarding that historical sequence of events that took place before the first destruction. And of course, as you know, if you recall, in the Second Temple, the Ark of the Covenant was not regathered into the Holy of Holies, and yet the Sanhedrin was functioning and was delivering decisions. And of course, the fact is, as we're going to learn in this very halacha regarding the name, kind of the nickname of the chamber of the high priest, the people of Israel, towards the close, at least, of the Second Temple period, were certainly not on a very high spiritual level. Generally speaking, the spiritual level at the beginning of the period of the First Temple was much, much higher for the people of Israel. Yet, ironically, perhaps, it's the Second Temple period which is etched into the memory of the people of Israel collectively as a certain type of golden age for the Jewish people. I personally think that that's because of the great stature of Torah knowledge and the great influence of the sages, and the fact that Torah became accessible to the whole people and was studied universally in the time of the Second Temple. I think that's why the Second Temple period is recalled with a certain kind of fondness. But on a spiritual level, there was a distance from the Shekhinah and a distance from God. Towards the close of the Second Temple period, there was influence of the Romans, and there were political problems, infighting, certain things that we perhaps still suffer from today. And hopefully, I say this again, close to Tisha B'Av as we're recording, hopefully, certainly when it comes time to rebuild, we're learning our lessons, have learned our lessons, and those problems, hopefully, we have overcome and realized the secret to our unity and the secret to our relationship with Hashem. And thus the prophets indeed promise that the era of the Third Temple is going to be free of all of the various foibles and inadequacies that were present in the time of the Second Temple. So, back to the Sanhedrin, which is sitting in the Chamber of the Hewn Stone, in the non-sanctified half of that chamber. The other half of that chamber, although this particular function is not mentioned here, I'd like to discuss it. All the Rambam tells us again, V'lashnei ptachim, this chamber of hewn stone has two openings, one into the holy, one into the non-sanctified, into the chol, and in the holy area, and in the non-holy area of the chetzi shel chol, that's where the Sanhedrin sat. But there is a very important area of knowledge I'd like to share with you that perhaps we'll have occasion to mention in detail again, but since we're on this particular chamber right now, I want to talk about what takes place every single day in the holy half of the Chamber of the Hewn Stone, and that is a daily function called the pious, the lottery. You can learn all about this in great detail and illustrated as well in the Temple Institute's website, of course, which is www.templeinstitute, one word, no breaks, .org. There is a pull-down menu on the top of every page. The navigation bar, Study Tools is the name of the link. And there, in the Study Tools menu, you will find a link called A Day in the Life of the Holy Temple, or is it A Day in the Light of the Holy Temple? It is a kind of an experience from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, everything that takes place in the Holy Temple. And there you will learn about the first, second, third, and fourth lotteries that were held every day. And these lotteries, it's called a lottery, in fact, in modern Hebrew, the Lahavdil, the gambling game or betting game, which is played, is called by the same word. It's an ancient word, the pious. It is a word referring to a lottery. And a lottery was held in the Holy Temple by a special overseer in order to equally apportion or distribute the privileges of which Kohanim would be able to officiate at which parts of the service during the day. In other words, there came a point in time, as we mentioned earlier, that the Kohanim began to become very numerous. There were many Kohanim that were serving the temple, many families that were represented, and they had to all have an equal opportunity to be able to participate in the service of the temple. And in order to be fair, there's nothing as fair as chance, although of course there's no such thing as chance. So there was a lottery that was held every day. 4 different parts of this lottery were held in this particular chamber in order to determine the parts of the service that would be officiated by during the course of the day. So we have a description from the Mishnayot, and again this is mentioned in great detail at the location that I gave you, the Day in the Light of the Holy Temple feature on the Study Tools menu of templeinstitute.org. Just to go over it very briefly, because we are right here, right now, in this chamber. The first lottery will determine who will merit the first service of the day. And this has to do with Trumat Hadeshin, with removing a particular amount of ashes from the altar that had accumulated there from the previous day's offerings. The second lottery has to do with a number of tasks that are apportioned at that lottery, which priests would actually slaughter the offering, who would receive its blood and bring it to the altar, who would remove excess ashes from the inner altar, meaning the golden incense altar, who would attend to it's called attending, improving the wicks of the menorah, and clean the cups of oil and ash. And then, for example, which Kohanim, in this particular part now that I'm telling you involves 6 priests, who would bring the parts of the offering to the altar's ramp, who would bring the fine flour for accompanying the meal offering to the altar, who would bring up the high priest's meal offering, who would pour the wine libation, all that in the second lottery. Yosef, our video editor, sitting behind the camera right now, is sitting and listening to this with a dreamlike expression on his face of envy, because he is a Kohen, and he is thinking about all of this, wondering what part of the service will be his, God willing, when the temple is built. And that's a very beautiful thing, that the Kohanim today, like Yosef, who is a primary example, and he's so humble, he remains off camera, but he is wondering when will this come to pass so that he'll be participating in that lottery. The third lottery is very unique, because the third lottery is only for a Kohen who's never before won that lottery. The third lottery is to determine who brings the incense every day. The incense offering is very, very unique and a very special part of the temple service according to mystical tradition. It's cited in the Zohar, the Holy Zohar, for example, that the incense offering is so beloved in Hashem's eyes, that it's part of the service that He loves the most. And there's something about it that was so propitious, that was so powerful, that any Kohen that brought the incense offering was rewarded with tremendous blessing. It was like a heavenly kind of thing. And simply put, in order to prevent one person from becoming too wealthy, becoming too powerful, the sages saw that whoever brings the incense offering is immediately a kind of elevated in life. And so therefore they made a ruling that the incense offering is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And so the overseer, this is the functionary in the temple whose job it was to administer this lottery. The overseer, this is all very dramatic when we read in the Mishnah, description of how this took place. The overseer, when he came to the third lottery, would cry out, Chadashim Lektoretz, new Kohanim, new ones, newbies, Chadashim, come forward to participate in the lottery of the Ketoreth, the incense. And only one who had never before brought it was eligible to appear even, to come forward to be part of the lottery. And then the fourth lottery was again open for the participation of all the Kohanim. And thus, since it follows the incense offering, which was only eligible for the newcomers, the overseer would now cry out for the fourth lottery. Both newcomers and veterans alike can come forward to draw lots for the fourth lottery. I keep saying lottery, and I haven't explained exactly how this was done, but we have an illustration which describes how this was done. The Kohanim that stood in a circle, and they began with a certain individual, and to know where they began from, that individual would remove his hat, and they, by a show of fingers, would simply go around the circle and determine the winner by the fingers that were drawn. And the fourth and final lottery of the day basically ascertained who merited to bring the parts of the offering from the ramp of the Mizbeach, the altar, to the top. And the priest, the Kohen, who wins the fourth lottery is actually the one who brings the parts of the offering up to the top of the altar. All of this taking place in every single day, in the, again, just as kind of a window to open up for you as far as all the different varied activities that are taking place in the temple. All this taking place every day in the sanctified half of the Chamber of the Hewn Stone. Lishkat HaGolah, still reviewing today and continuing as well with new information, the 17th halacha of chapter 5, the last halacha in chapter 5 in Beit HaBechira. And we're still talking about the chambers that are opening up onto the Court of Israel, and the three chambers in the northern part, Lishkat HaGazit, the Chamber of Hewn Stone, Lishkat HaGolah, the Chamber of the Wheel, or the Bowl, I've seen it translated as. And this word, Golah, if you're familiar with the Hebrew, seems very similar to, in fact seems identical with a word that generally refers to exile. Indeed, this chamber, which served the function of providing the needs of the water for everything that took place in the temple, the water supply of the temple, essentially, there was a well of some sort in this chamber that, according to some authorities, was actually dug and constructed by the returnees from the original Babylonian exile, and it was thus named for them in the very beginning days of the Second Temple era, Lishkat HaGolah, meaning the chamber of the exiled, the returning exiles, who in fact were instrumental in designing this system of water retrieval. And Lishkat HaGolah, the Rambam tells us, Sham haya bor, there was a well, shemalin mimenu bagula, which was, and water was filled from that cistern with some sort of a wheel. And this is here a question of how the word Gimel Lamed He, or Gimel Vav Lamed He is vocalized. With what vowels? So it's also possible to read it in this manner, Gula, which basically refers to some sort of wheel which was set and which was some sort of mechanism that provided water to be raised from there. And as he concludes regarding this chamber, Umisham misapkin mayim l'chol ha'azara. This is provided the water needs for the entire courts. Lishkat ha'etz hayta achoresh dehen. This chamber, the chamber of wood, was in back of the two previously mentioned chambers, the chamber of the Sanhedrin, Lishkat ha'gazet, the hewn stone, and the chamber of the Gola, despite the fact that it was in back of the other two and apparently not on the same level as the Rambam tells us. Gag shloshtan shaveh, the roof of all three was equal. What was the Lishkat ha'etz? I skipped here. Lishkat ha'etz hayta acharei shtehen. The chamber of the wood was behind the two previously mentioned chambers. Vi hayta lishkat kohen gadol. This chamber of wood was actually the private, personal chamber of the high priest, but as we're going to see, not all year round. It was used for a particular purpose. V'hiya nekret lishkat Parhedrin. And there's another name for the wood chamber, the chamber of the Kohen Gadol, and that's called the Parhedrin chamber. This Parhedrin is obviously not a Hebrew word. It is actually a foreign word, and it is also not terribly complimentary. Another sort of commentary on some of the problems that our nation faced in the close of the Second Temple period. When we return, we're going to hopefully finally be concluding this complex halacha, halacha Yud Zayin. We're going to talk about the reason for this name, this mysterious name Parhedrin, as being applied to the high priest towards the close of the Second Temple area. We're going to return and finish the 5th chapter in Hilchot Beit HaBechira, learning more and more about the Holy Temple, place of the Divine Presence, the light to Israel, and the light to the nations.
Light to the Nations is produced by the Temple Institute, Jerusalem, Israel. Dedications are available for upcoming Light to the Nations teachings. To make a dedication, please visit templeinstitute.org, the multimedia section, Light to the Nations, or email us at temple@temple.org.il. Your dedications help to make these productions possible.